In a solemn Virginia courtroom, the air was thick with silence as 78-year-old Sergeant Daniel Cole stood tall in his uniform. Time had weathered his face, but not his spirit. A Medal of Honor gleamed on his chest, a quiet testament to the sacrifice he made decades ago on a battlefield far from home. Today, however, he wasn't being honored, he was being charged. His offense? Peacefully protesting outside a closed-down VA hospital that had once treated him and countless others. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't blocking traffic. He simply stood with a hand-painted sign that read, "Forgotten, but not done fighting." As murmurs rose in the room, the judge entered, young, rigid, and sharp in his black robe. He didn't glance at the medal. He didn't ask for context. With a cold, clipped tone, he looked directly at Daniel and said, "Mr. Cole, remove that medal in my courtroom. It has no place here." Gasps rippled through the room like an invisible wave. Reporters leaned forward. A woman in the back covered her mouth. Daniel didn't flinch. His hand rose slowly to his chest, fingers brushing the medal, not with hesitation, but reverence. In that instant, the room wasn't just a courtroom, it was a battleground of dignity and misunderstanding. The decorated hero who had once taken bullets for freedom now faced something far colder, a system that had forgotten its own. As the camera shutters clicked, Daniel's silence spoke louder than any protest ever could. Daniel unpinned the Medal of Honor with hands that had once held wounded brothers and written final letters home. There was no anger in his expression, only a deep, settled sorrow. The courtroom remained silent, as if the walls themselves understood something sacred was being disturbed. With slow, deliberate steps, Daniel approached the bench. He didn't bow his head. He didn't plead his case. Instead, he placed the medal gently on the judge's bench, the medal glinting under the fluorescent lights. "This medal isn't mine," he said, voice calm but unwavering. "It belongs to every soldier who never made it back. Every name on that wall. Every family that sits at empty dinner tables. If you can't respect what this stands for, then you're right, it doesn't belong here." A few people in the courtroom blinked back tears. The judge stared at the medal, perhaps realizing for the first time that this wasn't just a piece of metal. It was blood and memory. It was nights in foxholes and years of silence. It was bravery forged in loss. Daniel turned and walked back to his place. His shoulders were still squared, his step steady. Though he had just been asked to remove what was arguably the highest symbol of American valor, he had done so without stripping himself of the honor it represented. The courtroom didn't erupt. There was no shouting. Just a profound, shared stillness. In that moment, everyone knew something irreversible had just happened, but not to Daniel. To the judge. That evening, the footage of Daniel's quiet defiance surged across the internet like wildfire. Within hours, millions had seen the clip of the elderly veteran placing his Medal of Honor on the judge's bench with solemn dignity. News anchors, social media users, and public figures voiced outrage. Veterans groups called the courtroom exchange a national disgrace. What struck people most wasn't Daniel's protest or even the medal, it was the look on his face. A mixture of sorrow and pride that resonated with anyone who had ever fought for something bigger than themselves. But as the story gained traction, attention quickly turned to the judge. His name, background, and history were scrutinized. Critics labeled him cold, unpatriotic, even heartless. Then, in an unexpected twist, someone uncovered an old obituary from nearly 30 years ago. The judge's father had served in Vietnam. A decorated Marine. Silver Star. Purple Heart. Killed in action. It stunned everyone. Especially those who had judged the judge. Journalists dug deeper. Friends and former colleagues revealed the judge rarely spoke of his father. Some said he never visited the memorial. Others recalled how, as a boy, he had quietly shut out anything related to war, medals, or service. The discovery painted a different picture, not of a cold man, but of someone carrying a lifetime of unprocessed grief. The story shifted. The public anger began to soften. What once looked like disrespect now seemed more like a wound reopened. And the world waited to see what the judge would do next. A week later, the courtroom filled again, this time not with tension, but with quiet anticipation. The same judge entered, but something about him had changed. Gone was the rigid posture, the cold detachment. Around his neck hung a pair of worn, rusted dog tags, his father's. As he stepped behind the bench, the entire room seemed to lean in. Sergeant Daniel Cole sat near the front, not as a defendant, but as an invited guest. His uniform was pressed, his demeanor calm, but his eyes held a cautious curiosity. The judge cleared his throat, his voice noticeably softer. "I asked a man to remove his honor," he began, struggling with the words. "Because I never faced my own." He paused, holding up the dog tags. "These belong to my father. I never wore them. I never spoke his name in this room, or any room. I thought silence was strength. But I realize now, it was fear." Turning to Daniel, the judge continued, "Your protest wasn't about defiance. It was about dignity. And your silence that day spoke a truth I couldn't ignore." He stepped down from the bench and approached Daniel, holding out the Medal of Honor with both hands. "This doesn't belong on a bench. It belongs on a heart like yours." Daniel stood, his weathered hand gently reclaiming the medal. He looked the judge in the eyes, nodding with quiet forgiveness. In that moment, the courtroom wasn't a place of justice. It was a place of healing. Daniel pinned the Medal of Honor back onto his chest, not with pride, but with quiet grace. The courtroom rose in a spontaneous, respectful silence. Even the judge, now standing among the crowd, bowed his head, not out of shame, but out of understanding. The moment had transcended the case, the law, even the conflict. It had become something human. Daniel turned to face the judge. "It's not forgiveness I'm offering," he said gently. "It's understanding. That's all we ever really fight for, on the battlefield or in life." His voice didn't rise, but it carried through the room like a hymn. The judge, visibly moved, stepped forward once more. "I've spent years interpreting the law," he said, "but I forgot the people behind it. Starting today, I'm stepping away from this bench, not in disgrace, but with purpose." 2 weeks later, headlines told a different story. Judge resigns to advocate for veterans' rights. Photos surfaced of him visiting VA hospitals, organizing mental health clinics, and standing alongside Daniel at memorials. The two men, once adversaries across a courtroom, now stood shoulder to shoulder at rallies, symbols of healing, not division. Across the country, people shared the story not just as a courtroom drama, but as a reminder of how compassion can change lives. And somewhere in a small-town cafe, a young boy pointed to a photo of Daniel on the wall and asked his father, was he a hero? His father smiled. "Yes, son. But not just for what he did in war, for what he did in peace."